Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 3 of the Firefighters Podcast. I'm your host, Rob Serra. With me today is none other than my oldest brother, Andrew. He's the oldest of 3, so he gets to find out what it's like to be number 3 this week. Andrew, welcome.
How's it going, Rob?
Good, good. Andy is the captain of FDNY Ladder 20 in Soho. He's also the reason that I became a firefighter. So a question I've always wanted to ask Andy is, what made you want to become a firefighter? Because I know you always wanted to be one, and I never asked you why.
I mean, you're right. It is something I always thought about growing up. We were exposed to it in the sense that, our mother, she grew up with her dad being a firefighter. So it was something that was always, I guess, talked about from her, but she was always very subtle about it. If you remember, she never pushed it on us or really, was over the top with steering us in any particular career path. She just, just enough to put it in the back of our minds. And when the test came out, she got the applications for us. And I think that, it had the desired effect. I think had she been more forceful, it might have backfired, and being, also, with us growing up with dad, with trucks, driving trucks and working on trucks, I think it was a way, knowing I wanted to go into public service and be able to help people, it was a perfect fit. I got to help people and be around trucks. So it was the best of both worlds.
Right. I mean, it's hard for me to remember much. I was 15 when she passed away, but I never remember her talking to me directly about becoming a firefighter. I do remember, though, is that she seemed to gravitate to other firefighters, right? Like her friends were either the wives of firefighters or the sons or daughters or even firefighters themselves. I noticed like now that I look back, like the parents on the hockey teams that I played on, she seemed to hang out with the ones who were firemen, right?
Right. On Staten Island, it's a 50-50. Yeah.
Right.
And I think, had you maybe towards the end of high school or when you were in college, maybe, when you really did start to think about what career you were going into, I think she probably might have talked about it more with you, but she was, how she was. Had I had something else in mind, if I would, not that I could have, but if I wanted to be a nuclear physicist, she would have been finding out, the best information on how to do that. She would have supported us, I think, no matter what.
Yeah, that's true. I guess we'll never know, right? But so you took the test, and when did you take the test? Like the early 90s, right? Like 91 and 92, something like that?
92.
And it took you 7 years to get on? What was that about?
6.5. There was a class action suit, and there was a hiring freeze for a number of years and stuff. And they didn't start hiring off the list, I think, until the summer of 1995.
Right. So you didn't feel like waiting, right? So that's why you went to the dark side at first?
Yeah, I took the test right around the same time. Police, fire, all the tests that came out. And I was driving the truck at the time and waiting, for the fire department. And the police department called me first. So, I went in the police academy in the spring of 97. Yeah.
Right. And just for the record, what was your list number for the fire department?
If I remember correctly, it was 2129, I think.
Okay, because I just wanted our listeners to know that mine was 281. I just wanted to file that in the record. All right. So you transferred over 98, right? It's kind of was a hazy time for me. I think that was my freshman year of college. So I might have been busy. So I apologize if I didn't make it to your graduation, but I had other things going on. So you got out 98, and where did you go?
Red Hook, ladder 131.
Ladder 131.
Yeah.
That was so that was your first stop, right? And you had to leave for a couple of years. But how long were you there the first time?
Just about a year. I got there in November, and stayed there to the following year, and then the following October, back then they used to do the training rotation every October. So we had to go. You did, the first 3 years, you did 3 different stops, and then at the end, you went back to your first stop.
Right. All right, cool. So let's talk about 131 for a bit before we move on to the other companies you worked in. So what stands out about your time 131? Did you have anybody who were your mentors there? Because I know you had a lot of people that you look up to.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, everywhere I went, I was very lucky. I had great officers, great captains, and senior men who always took pride in the place and looked out for the probies and the new guys. And it was great. We 2 guys that stand out. Really that come to mind quickly is Lieutenant Tom Coleman and Jerry Sweeney, who was one of the senior. He wasn't a super senior man at that time. He had about 7-8 years more than I did, but he was one of those guys that always took charge and all. And funny story. I was thinking about, fairly recently, a story I completely forgot about, working with those 2, with Lieutenant Coleman and Jerry Sweeney. When I was a probie, we were relocated one night to Flatbush, right around the change of tours. We were relocated to 157 truck, and we were there for a couple of hours. And then they came back from their job and they went back in service. And we start driving back to Red Hook. And I remember, the rigs were a little bit different back then. There was no speakers on the back of the rig, and there was plexiglass between where the guys in the back step sat and the officer and the chauffeur in the front. So we really didn't know a whole lot what was going on. Usually on the way to a box or something, if it sounded like a job, the officer would bang on the plexiglass to let the guys know, that they gave a 1075 or something like that. But we're just driving, and I remember, I think Lieutenant Coleman turned around and said, sounds like we got something, or I found out after. I think they just happened to read off a phone alarm that was coming in, and it was basically on our route home. I don't think we were assigned to it though. I think he tried to get us put on the box, and the dispatcher said stay in service, something like that. But we ended up driving up on it, and there it was like a 6-story apartment building and fire on the first floor, and we were in by ourselves. It was
Fireman's dream, right? Especially a truck guy's dream.
It's we get the Lieutenant Coleman and Jerry Sweeney had the irons. I had the can, of course, being the probie, and I'm following them in, just trying to keep up. Grab my hook, grab my can. I'm running after them, and we get to the door. Jerry popped the door open. It was locked, and thick black smoke starts pushing out. We had the mask up right at the door, and we go in, and I remember Lieutenant Coleman. This was not SOP at the time, but he turned to Jerry Sweeney. He said, "Stay at the door, keep it closed. Not to give the fire fresh air and to act as a beacon, being that we had no hose line." So Jerry stayed at the door, and it was a pretty big apartment. So we start crawling in, and the fire's in the kitchen, and it's one of them, like the kitchen and the living room are kind of like an open concept, and then in the back of the apartment were the bedrooms. So the fire's going in the kitchen, and Lieutenant Coleman tells me, stay here at the kitchen, just try and hold the fire back. I'm gonna make a quick search. So I'm there at this archway, trying to hit it with the can. 2.5 gallons. It only goes so far.
Right.
Hitting the top of the arch, hitting the ceiling, trying to push it back, just trying to hold it in there. The kitchen's going really well now, and next thing you know, it's rolling out past the arch along the living room ceiling over my head. And the can position did not have radios back then. That wouldn't be until I think after 9/11 they gave everybody gets a radio now. But back then the can didn't have a radio, so I couldn't call Lieutenant Coleman and tell him that I was out of water and the fire was getting past me. So I started to back up as the fire is rolling over my head. Now it basically the whole entire kitchen flashes over, and now it's starting to consume the living room. I back up and I kind of crouched behind a couch just to kind of get some cover from it. And Jerry Sweeney, who was still at the door, he's thinking that I'm in the kitchen, because the last he could see me, I was in the kitchen with the can trying to hold it back. So I see him I just see like the reflector on his pant leg go flying past me as I'm behind the couch. I hear him screaming, Andy, Andy, and he dove into the kitchen, trying to get me out. So now I had to like lean forward and like grab his leg and pull him back, and pull him out. And now we're both behind this couch. And he says to me, where's Coleman? I said, he's in the back in the bedroom. He goes, all right, come on. So me and Jerry start crawling along the wall, trying to get to the bedrooms. And we come to a bend, and we run, smack dab right into Lieutenant Coleman. We bump into him, and he's cradling something, and he yells to us, he goes, come on, let's get out of here. And we both followed him and followed the wall. Now we go back past the fire. We get to the front door again, open it, go out into the hallway and close it behind us. And then out in the hallway, the smoke lifted a little bit. And I look, and Lieutenant Coleman is cradling like a little, maybe 6 or 7-year-old girl. And, she was starting to come to, starting a little bit out of it, but she was otherwise, okay. It was one of those crazy stories. And like I said, I had 2 seasoned firefighters with me, and just, like pros, they got the kid out of there. And, and it was one of those crazy stories, like I said, I had completely forgotten about, because we come out, and now the first due engine is there, the first due truck is there, they go in, they take over. We come out and hand off the little girl to an ambulance. And next thing I remember is we're on the rig getting stuff, and the chief kind of pulled Lieutenant Coleman off to the side. And it seemed to me like they were a little heated, like discussing it. Next, he comes back over and he gets on the rig. He goes, come on, let's go. And we just drove back to Red Hook, and that was it. Like maybe they weren't happy that, we took in the fire when, on our own, but, and it's the type of thing, he, flat out saved that little girl's life. He should have got a medal, and, it should have been a big deal. And we just went back to the firehouse and cooked dinner, and it was just one of those crazy stories all in a day's work,
Right. And so he didn't get a medal over hurt feelings. Is that?
And I like I said, I completely forgot about that story until recently. And I ran into Lieutenant Coleman recently, and I recounted it for him. And I said, am I remembering it correctly? He goes, no, that's exactly how it happened. And I said, were we in trouble? Is that why? And he goes, no, they didn't care that much. And when it was done, the other guys took over, so we just left. But maybe because we weren't assigned, they wouldn't put in for a medal for him, or maybe, he's just a very humble guy and didn't push the issue, Tom. And he just, like I said, he's not looking for it. He just, was happy that everything turned out well,
Right. That makes sense. I mean, I know him a little bit for you, and that seems to make sense. But was that little girl alone? Was anybody else in there?
I do remember that there were the police got involved. There were it seemed like they were starting to ask questions with neighbors and where the parent went, so there was a little bit of I don't know if it was a controversy or again, like I said, we drove back to the firehouse, and one of those things, like, in our job, quite often we don't know the next day, we don't know how things turned out, so it's like, right. If it's not news, I never heard anything more about it. I think there was something to that, because the police were there asking around.
Right. I guess that shows the importance of closing the door, right? I mean, without a hose line, we see those commercials the FDNY puts out, but probably saved all your asses, right?
Tom Coleman, he was heads up. That was not the SOP back then. They taught us in probie school, you force a door open, you chalk it open with the axe, and you go in.
Right.
Everyone else can find it. And I think we, really didn't start to understand the thermodynamics of it, until later. And it became more of the SOP that you always keep that door closed until the hose line moves in, but that was a call he made on his own, and it was the right call.
Right. And also, I guess the importance of everybody having a radio. I mean, I remember that too, there were engine positions that didn't have radios also, right? When we first started out. That might've been helpful to be able to talk.
It was, and I don't even think it was a money issue, because quite often we had radios in the closet in the firehouse. Like, it wasn't, I think they thought it was a radio discipline issue. They didn't want too much chatter, and they figured the can and the irons, they'd be standing right next to the officer anyway. But like an example like this, sometimes you're not,
Right. Yeah. I mean, I could see that. I mean, I've been to jobs where a lot of radio transmissions could have been an email, I don't know. Maybe it's just me. All right. So what made you want to go to SOC? Was it 9/11 itself? Because after you were after your rotation, right? You went back to 131
Yeah.
and 9/11 happened. So and obviously you took a big role in the firehouse, being a family liaison for Christian's family. But what made you want to leave? Because that couldn't have been an easy decision at that point.
It was hard to leave. Before 9/11, I always loved the firehouse, 279 and 131. I loved the guys there. And, but I think maybe before 9/11, I had thoughts of, going to the busiest place I could possibly be in. Or, I had worked, a couple of guys I worked with while I was out on rotation had formerly worked in SOC companies, and then transferred out later. And I always like picked their brain about, that aspect of the job kind of always appealed to me. But then, obviously 9/11 happened, the firehouse, it made us very close, like we're always like a family of firehouse, but it would just, you know, made it even that much more so. I didn't think I could ever leave there, and definitely not, as the months went by, I didn't think about it much until right around maybe the new year, and then it was actually Lieutenant Coleman again and my Captain Marty Ford, who, the two of them were great, and they were always looking out for me. And they had saw something posted somewhere that SOC, because they were decimated, they were just, putting out a feeler for anyone, across the job who might be interested. That
I think that was the department orders, if I remember right.
yeah, it was something along those lines. And Lieutenant Coleman called me in the office and he said, I know in the past you would talk about stuff like this, and are you still interested? We can make an application for you. And it's definitely something I felt, like working, down on the pile, during the recovery, most, in the initial weeks right afterwards, you remember, like, most of us were just in bucket brigades, and when you were rotated down there, you were in a bucket brigade, and you wanted to help, you wanted to do as much as possible. And, I saw the SOC guys, crawling into voids, or, rappelling down the sides of, cut beams to get into any little nook and cranny, and, doing stuff that, in my mind, that, if anyone was going to find survivors, those are the guys who were going to find them. And
Right.
I think, like a lot of people, like everyone, I wanted to do as much as possible after 9/11. I wanted to be in the thick of it and be the person, doing that the next time, because we were all convinced, there was going to be a next time. So I think that was what really ultimately pushed me to transfer to SOC.
All right. I'll take that. Um, so what happened once you got there? Was it what you thought? I mean,
Sure.
the firefighting stuff's the same, right? But what about the other stuff?
It was definitely everything I thought it would be. It was challenging. I went to Squad 1, and the firehouse had lost 12 members on 9/11, which, it's a single company. It's not a double house. And so basically half the guys assigned there died in one day, and that left, and then it only left, maybe 12 or 13, alive to take care of all those families. And so it was a much different dynamic as far as, or I should say a much more intensified dynamic of, dealing with the loss. And most of the families, I think, hadn't even had a memorial or a funeral yet. So it was almost like starting over again. Whereas, in 279 and 131, we had all of our memorials in like October and November. And now I went to Squad 1, and it was like, there was still, the bulk of them was still, had yet to be planned yet, so there was that going on. And then, transfer to SOC, there's just, on any given tour within the firehouse, there's so much to learn with the tools on the rig, and, the technical gear and all that stuff. So you're just not going nonstop. And in a way that was good, instead of focusing solely on the loss and the rebuilding, for me, it was just all this new stuff to learn, the ropes, the rescue gear, all the extrication equipment and all that stuff.
Right. That's cool. And you still got to do the firefighting stuff, which is what I found I mean, I know there's people listening who know the difference between squads and rescues, but for the layman, essentially rescue companies, they don't have hoses, right? So when they have their first due area, they operate as a ladder company. And a squad company has the hose bed and a pumper, so they operate as an engine company in their area. So at least when you go to a squad, you still get to put fires out, right? Did you have any good nozzle jobs there?
I think I had, just as a first due engine, maybe one comes to mind in the neighborhood. Right down the block on Union Street. It was, a couple blocks from the firehouse. A couple of rooms of fire early in the morning. We got in by ourselves, and I had the nozzle, and I think that was the only one. And then, obviously being working in a squad company, also it just, sometimes at multiple alarm fires, we ended up stretching a line by the orders of the chief, or just relieving an engine company. So you get to operate as an engine in that capacity too.
Right. That's cool.
Yeah,
But
you get worlds.
yeah. So now you were studying for lieutenant while essentially when you first transferred there, right? So you were doing double studying essentially, like because I mean I remember I felt like I spent all my time off reading all those books, and I mean you could get a bachelor's degree with the amount of classes you have to take to be in SOC, right? So
Yeah. To be honest, I didn't study much for lieutenant once I transferred to SOC.
No?
I had, I was single at the time, before 9/11, and living by myself most of the time.
You did have a roommate there for a little bit.
Waking up on the couch or something,
Right.
or in the guest bedroom. But for the most part, I had time to study then. So I knew, and I figured I would use it to, prepare for that. I didn't go crazy studying for lieutenant. I just, a couple of chapters a week, here or there. I did, I took the fire tech courses and whatever they told me to go over. I just basically read in like the year and a half leading up to what was supposed to be the lieutenant's test in October of 2001. And then, so that was really most of the studying I did. And then 9/11 happened, and, I didn't touch a book, like just about everything. Nobody even opened the book.
Right.
And I transferred to squad one, and the same thing, like you said, there's so much to learn with the SOC equipment and the new gear and the new training that I really didn't do a whole lot. And then I think they announced the test was going to be in June of 2002. And maybe a couple of weeks before the test, I just went back to the books and reviewed everything and took a few fire tech courses. Luckily that was a pretty straightforward test.
Right.
Not too many, crazy out of the blue questions. And I think, and I got, fairly middle of the road grade, and, I didn't have that much seniority. So I was actually not that high up on the list, but there was still so many vacancies after 9/11. I think they promoted like 180 lieutenants the first day that they promulgated the list, some crazy number like that.
Yeah.
So they moved pretty quick.
I remember that. That was crazy. So you became a lieutenant. You were fairly young, right? Just 6 or 7 years on the job. I don't remember how old you were, but you couldn't have been very old. What was that like? Was it? I always wondered that. Like, what was it like when you go to your first fire and you're in charge of 4 or 5 other guys? Is that intense?
I was lucky. I went to the 15th division as a covering lieutenant, and everywhere I went, I was treated very well. I remember my first tour as a lieutenant. It was in 175 truck, and Jerry Morrissey was the senior man over there, and he was driving. He remembered me. When I was on the rotation, I had rotated through that same battalion. So, he remembered me, and he said, "Oh, today's your first tour." I said, "Yeah," and he goes, "All right, we got you," and they were great. Respectful for the rank, but knew enough when, and, had a, in a way, like a two-way street. They, the officer, takes care of the guys, but the guys take care of the officer, and they looked out, and it was, I think working with a lot of good senior chauffeurs like that got me through that.
Yeah. I think that is, for my money, I think a good senior man is the heart of the job, right? They're the most important people that we have. I mean, I remember I was lucky. I had two legends essentially at my first firehouse, right? I had Bill Whalen in Engine 216 and Warren Ward. I mean, Warren did like 40 years on the job. The guy invented five or six of the tools that we use, just a wealth of knowledge. I mean, I can remember at like 4 in the morning, you'd hear the tools going off in the back of the rig, and you go down there to check it out, and it's Warren back there cleaning a Halligan or, you know, tinkering with something. But those guys, right? Those are the guys that really pass on the tradition and
Sure.
make.
Generally speaking, officers kind of pass through places, but the senior, firefighters, they're the ones that, they're the backbone of the company. Just like the military, right? They say the non-commissioned officers are the backbone of the military. I think the senior members of the companies are the backbone of the company. They set the tone, they set the tradition.
Right. Absolutely. But that's something you do a good job of now. I mean, you're the captain of a very historic company, right? You guys are, how old is your company?
I think 1889 they started the company.
1889 in the heart of Soho in Manhattan. And I've always been impressed with your level of detail and your I guess desire to keep that history and keep the connection between the new guys and the old guys, and I think that's cool. But there's one story I don't know if people know about. Member of your company saved a little girl uh, in the 80s, I think, and
Yeah,
you helped reunite them. Can you tell us that story?
I answered the phone. That's about the extent of I
Oh,
know.
stop.
Eugene Puglisi, he's a Vietnam vet, Marine. Did I think 25 years with the fire department or 27 years with the fire department, longtime member of Ladder 20. Started in Engine 27, I believe, on Franklin Street, and then they shut them in the 70s, and he came to 20 truck. And so he did over 20 years, I think, in Ladder 20. And in the 80s, they were on a water leak, and he was the chauffeur, I believe. And the company was on a water leak on Worcester Street, and somebody in one of the neighboring buildings came running out to the rig and said, "Oh, there's a fire in my building." So Eugene, I think he had like the blue quilted buff coat jacket on and his helmet and a Halligan in his hand, and he ran in. He called his officer, let him know. He ran up and followed the guy who came out to tell him, and went up to the apartment, and he crawled in and found a little girl in a crib and pulled her out and gave her CPR at the scene, mouth to mouth, and revived her and handed her to an ambulance. There was actually a picture of him holding the baby on the cover of the Daily News back in 1982, 83, whenever it happened. And then to complete the circle of the story, during the height of the COVID pandemic, when New York was being decimated, nurses from around the country volunteered. So this woman, Deidre, she came from, I think her family was living down south somewhere in Virginia, and she came to volunteer to be an ER nurse in Brooklyn during COVID. And one night she was talking to some firefighters in the ER. She says, "Oh, FDNY, when I was a little girl, New York firefighter saved my life at a fire in Soho." And the guys were like flabbergasted at this story, and they're like, "Oh, you have to call there." Yeah. So they gave the number to the firehouse, and it just so happens I answered the phone the next morning, and she's explaining it to me, and meanwhile, I knew the story because we have Eugene got a medal that year. We have the medal citation right outside the office door with his picture and all, and I was familiar with the story. And she's telling the story. I was like, "Oh yeah, I do know, what you're talking about." And then I think because it was so long ago, she was almost timid to ask, like, "Eugene, is he still around? Is he?" She didn't know how to ask, And I was like, "Eugene, we see him 3 times a week. He comes here, he drinks our coffee, he eats our cake, and parks out front. Yeah,
It could be a stool.
I'll call him right now." And she couldn't believe it, And I remember I hung up with her and I called Gene, and I told him about the phone call, and there was silence, and I thought I dropped the call, and he couldn't get the words out. He was choked up, and it was great. The Daily News did a follow up story about it. They did Zoom reunion because of COVID, and then a year later, this past summer, they met at the firehouse. They had a in-person reunion. It was really nice. And she was a helicopter pilot in the military, and Eugene worked on a helicopter crew in Vietnam. So they had that military connection. So it was pretty wild.
That's crazy. And she became a nurse, right? And came here to help during a pandemic, which is even better, right? That's a good story, right? Those are the ones.
Stories with the job, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I know we both have our share of bad ones. Another thing, we stress positivity, or I try to, even though, as I said, we both have seen our share of bad stuff on the job. We had the Nav, who fancies himself a poet, on the first episode. Last week we had Joe, who left the job to put himself through law school, and he's out there doing his thing. But I think what a lot of people don't know is all the different types that we have on the job, right? It takes all types to make a firehouse, all types of firefighters. And I mean, I would say you have to be one of the highest educated firefighters I've ever met. You have 2 master's degrees, right? One in, is it political science?
Yeah.
And one in Italian, which I still don't understand how you did that. You've written 3 books. Firstly, I guess my question is, how are your books received in the firehouse? Secondly, how did you do it? How did you find the time to put yourself through grad school twice? And you got your bachelor's degree after you were on the job, or both bachelor's degrees.
Yeah.
So, I don't like to ask double barrel questions, but go ahead. You're my brother. I could do whatever I want.
We all find things, I think, at the right time in our life. In the early 90s, I started taking college classes, and I think I just had other pursuits at the time. I stopped to, start working as a truck driver, and then the police academy, and then ultimately the fire academy. I think I wanted to set myself up more in my career in the 90s. And it wasn't until later, after I was on the fire department a couple of years, that I decided, you know what, I think I would like to finish college, and that's what pushed me to go back. And once I started, I just kind of got a taste for it, and I enjoyed taking classes. It was fun for me. It was, I never felt like it was work. I liked writing, I liked writing, working on term papers and handing them in and getting the feedback from the professors. And so it never really felt like work. And once I started, I studied political science because I liked that aspect of it. It's almost history with a dash of philosophy, and I wanted to keep going with that. So, I just applied to a master's program for that. And then the Italian just kind of came out of just wanting to learn the language, traveling in Italy, and then meeting Teresa. She grew up in Italy and speaking Italian, and, wanting to go back there with her. I wanted to learn it. So I started taking undergraduate classes in Italian, just to learn how to speak, better. And once I took all the undergrad classes, I just decided, I was at Hunter. For the heck of it, I applied to the master's program, and the professors were great over there. I enjoyed the classes and going to school a couple of nights a week. So that's what I did. Pre-kids.
Yeah, obviously. So when you wrote your first novel, right, that had to be a bit tense. I don't know, tense is the right word, but you had to be a bit worried about how it was going to be received at the kitchen table, right? Because,
Yeah, no, guys have all been good about it. Like anything else, if there's jokes about everything, but that's all good. I've never really had, I think the guys have all been great. They've, if somebody asks about it, or uh, you know, happens to have read one of my books and they want to talk about it, they're always I love that. Like everyone else in the job, I love sharing my interest and getting to know them and them getting to know me. So it's all been good.
All right. Not as exciting as I had hoped. Um, but along those lines, I know you're a bit of you're quiet, but I know you're a bit of a prankster. So do you mind telling everybody what your favorite firehouse prank is that you ever pulled off or witnessed? You can give credit where it's due.
The best one I think I ever witnessed, it backfired on the prankster involved, but
those are the best kinds. Let's hear it.
And I'm not going to change any names because nobody's innocent. I was rotating in 231, and they're very big on roll call there at the change of tours. Once the bell rings at 1800, everyone goes out in front of the rigs and you exchange information and drill and talk about stuff. Usually takes 20 minutes, sometimes a half hour, depending on what's going on. So right before the change of tours, Pat Delina from 231 was eating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, on a roll and a cup of coffee. And then roll call starts. So he left everything on the table and we went out and had roll call. And then next thing you know, about a half hour later, we go back in the kitchen and he sits back down in the same spot. And there's this half-eaten peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And Pat was the biggest prankster in the entire firehouse. So, and if he was a target, it's only because he brought it on himself, because no one was safe when he was around, from buckets of water to anything. So he takes a bite into his peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and all of a sudden he makes a face. And I'm watching him, and he pulls it out, and there's a wet, the brown paper towels that are the recycled paper towels that are in every firehouse, the square. There's a wet paper towel in the sandwich, and he's pulling it out, and we're looking at it. He's like, "What is this?" He's like making a face, and sitting at the end of the table was the chief's aide, Charlie Van Rossum, who ended up being the captain of 11 Truck. He did like 40 years on the job. Charlie, he's a great guy, but at that time he was driving the 4-4 battalion, and he starts giggling uncontrollably at the hero poker face, So he's at the end. He's holding his side. He's laughing so hard he can't stop. So Pat looks at him. He goes, "Charlie, do you know what this is?" And Charlie's laughing. He goes, "No, I don't know." He goes, "You did this, didn't you?" And he goes, "No, I swear." But he can't stop laughing. So Pat puts the sandwich in the garbage, puts the plate in the dishwasher, and walks out of the kitchen. That's it. So usually the Chiefs car, it was a big apparatus floor, 231, 120, 44. And the Chiefs car is parked in between the two rigs on the middle. And usually when a run would come in, if everybody was going, the aide would come down, get the car started, get everything set up and wait. And then the chief would come down the stairs and close the two doors and then get in the car. So a run comes in like maybe an hour or so later, your phone alarm, everybody goes. And Charlie, for whatever reason, must have been on the third floor in the bathroom. The chief comes down first. So the chief gets down the stairs and gets in the car and closes the door. And Charlie's, playing catch now. He slides on a pole, he grabs his radio, but instead of getting in the car and starting it, he just, he wanted to power up the computer. He just reached into the car while he was putting his radio on and fixing himself. He reached in the car and started it. And as soon as he started the ignition, an explosion of, white powder blew out all of the vents on the dashboard, and Chief Scanlon jumps out of the car covered in dust from head to toe. And it turns out, Pat thinking he was going to get Charlie because the aide always started the car and waited for the chief.
Right.
He filled the vents with baby powder and then meticulously wiped them clean, pointed them forward, and turned everything on high. So when he started, it would get the aide, but it backfired. It got the chief. But now we have the phone alarm for a fire, and we had to go. So we all get there, and there's the chief. And he was an old school guy, Scanlon. And he never said a word to anybody. He just stood in front of the building taking reports on his radio. It wasn't a fire. it turned out to be, nothing big, but he's taking reports. He's got hair covered in powder, his uniform, everything. So that was the backfire of it. One of the funniest things.
Why would he have put it in the Chiefs side though?
No, I think it was just he got a little overzealous and he put so much in there that it just, collateral damage. Anyone in the car was getting coded.
It was the anger, probably.
Yeah.
That's funny. I remember I mean, I had a few good buckets in my day, not to give myself too much credit. But my favorite bucket of all time had to be Tom Westman. You remember he won Survivor. If you've
Yeah.
if you watched Survivor and remember there was a firefighter who won, he was my lieutenant. And so one day where People Magazine comes by to do a photo shoot with him, with all the guys, and everyone's all dressed up to the nines. He's all clean shaven and looking handsome, and they're taking pictures out front. And I looked over at Glenn Tracy, who was the senior man in 108, and I just looked at him, and he gave me the slight nod. So I said, "That's a commissioned hit, right?" The senior man just gave me the nod. So I run upstairs, freaking fill up my bucket. I jump up on the roof. All the guys clear out, and there's Tom standing there. People Magazine taking all the shots, and I just, boom, I hit him. I don't think a drop hit the floor, and all I remember is the look on his face because it was plastered on the page on People Magazine. My hit made the papers, so that was my proudest
That's a good
bucket. Yeah, and there's nothing he could do. Nothing anybody could do about it. He knows he earned it. So. Plus, he retired, so he couldn't really retaliate against me anyway. But from what I hear, he was the firehouse prankster in his day. So I think he took it well. But all right. I know we both have a lot of stories we could tell. We could probably go on for another 2 hours, but I promised I wasn't going to talk about 9/11 in every episode, but it's my show and you're my brother, and I have to ask you this because I never have. On 9/11, I've told this story before. Well, backstory is you kind of forced me to take the test. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. I remember you signed me up. I was up at Hobart, got my shirt on. I was up at Hobart. I was 19, I think, and you said, "Listen, you got to come home. The test is whatever day it was, Saturday, whatever." Goes, and if you don't come home and take it, you got to pay me back the $60. That's what you told me. So $60 to a college sophomore was a lot of money. So I said, all right, fuck it. I guess I'll go take the test. I really didn't think about being a fireman like you did. The only memories I had was our first line of duty funeral. Phil Diadamo's when I was 5 years old. I remember watching it from the classroom window in PS11. Our mother wouldn't let me go. She made me go to school that day, even though it was her best friend's husband. But the teacher must have known that we were family friends because she let me stand in the little window, which overlooked St. Anne's Church. Anyway, that was the only memory I had of the fire department as a kid. But on 9/11, I've mentioned this before. When I was on the Verrazano Bridge, I called you because I didn't know what to do. And you advised me to go home and get my gear and go to a firehouse where you could have said pretty much anything, right? You could have told me to go to 131 and grab your second set because it's literally a couple miles from the Trade Center. It's just right on the other side of the tunnel. What was that? Because I was your brother and you were worried, or like I always wondered because a lot of guys would have just said, keep going,
Yeah, I believe I asked you if you had your gear. I don't remember because you had your hockey stuff with you, right? You were going to try out for the hockey team.
Right.
I do remember, I think, asking you if you had your gear in the trunk or whatever, and you said, no, it's home. And then I think I said you should go home and call the academy, right? Because you hadn't started at your firehouse yet. You were.
No, I haven't even dropped off my cake yet.
I assume maybe, that they would want all the probies like together to like some kind of special detail or, relief somewhere or, as a unit, I think about, I actually do think about that phone call a lot, because I think even at the time, I almost said go to Rescue 5 and 160 because
It's
I
right
think
there
you were
too. Yeah.
right near there. And with the division up there, I figured maybe the division would put you on a bus or, or if you would hop on a rig and go, whenever they were dispatched from
Right.
there. So, but I think the determining factor was that you didn't have your gear. And I didn't even think of like you would borrow gear, that you should just go get your gear,
Right.
That was probably the determining factor at the moment. I'll be honest with you. Before the first tower collapsed, I don't remember consciously thinking of a complete collapse as a viable, as a real possibility at the moment. Just from what I was, I saw it on the news and said, all right, I got to get to my firehouse and we got to get there, But it wasn't until I got to the firehouse and I saw Mike Golding by the house watch, and he told me one of the towers had collapsed, and I think that was, I don't remember thinking about collapse before that moment, So
Right.
I thought, we all need to get as close as possible. I was thinking, So I think it was more that I just wanted you to go get your gear,
Yeah. I mean, we might have spoken one more time after that. I think before you might have been on the scene. I don't remember. I think I remember talking to you one more time after that. But last week I had Joe on and he was talking about how he couldn't get in touch with Mike. He knew Mike was there. Um, but I never really had those like I knew you were there, but I never had that feeling like Joe says he had, uh, that he knew Mike was gone. Like I knew when I was there, one of my main concerns was finding you. But it wasn't something like I didn't have like a gut feeling that you were dead. I just needed to see you. I don't know if I ever told you this, but I think it was the next day or one of those next days. I still hadn't spoken to you. And I just remember I stopped by 131 and I was like, where's Andy? I haven't heard from him. And they said he's in the bunk room. And it was probably early morning, like 10, 11 o'clock. And I went in the bunk room and I turned on all the lights and I just went around to every bunk and I leaned over and looked at your face, and your face was covered in fucking dust. And I just remember I saw your lungs move up and down, and that was enough. And I shut the light and left. I don't know if I ever told you that, but that's how I confirmed that you were still alive.
Yeah, I didn't know that. That had to be the morning of the 12th, I think, because we were there, all through the night. We got back.
Yeah, that
Like,
makes sense because I think I got back to Staten Island and got my car, and then I drove out to 136, which is in Elmhurst, Queens. And then on my way back from 136, because they said go home and come back tomorrow. So on my way back from 136, I think I stopped by 131.
it must have been. Me and Joe Thompson, we were there together over the night, and we got back at like 9 a.m., 10 a.m., somewhere around there. And then I went and I had been up for over 24 hours, so that's when I went to the bunk room. So that makes sense.
All right. Well, I'm glad you made it. So, all right. I know I know we're definitely gonna have you on again. I say this every week now, but I think you got a lot more stories in there. 23 years now on the fire department. Hopefully the next time we talk, you'll be retired and enjoying it with my niece and nephew. And you could speak a little bit more freely. But I just want to say thanks. Thanks for the good advice on 9/11. Thanks for forcing me to come home and take the test. Um, well, some days I don't thank you for that. I got to be honest. But you know, we're here, right? Um, so yeah, man. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah.
I know there's a lot more questions I got to ask you, but I got to let you go. But if there's anything else you want to tell oh yeah, what we should tell the people out there is Andy wrote a memoir about 9/11 called Finding John. If you haven't picked it up yet, it's on Amazon. It's also been released in Italian for our Italian listeners out there. And the beautiful part about this book is all the proceeds go to the Ray Pfeiffer Foundation. It's something that's important to both of us. And I think it's really cool that Andy did that and is doing that. But also I think his story is important for people to hear. I think it's important for people to know all different perspectives of 9/11. And I think his is a very powerful and poignant one. And I believe it's something that needs to be told for the Men of Four truck, right? So check that out. And what else you got, Andy? Anything else coming up that you want people to know about?
No, I think you covered it all. I think it was, thanks for having me on the show. It's nice talking, And, we'll hash more out, I think, over maybe a glass of scotch or, and we'll plan the next one.
All right. I'm looking forward to that too. All right. So we're going to say goodbye to Captain Andrew Serra for now, but stay tuned because he'll be back.